Electrolysis. Electrolysis is the breakdown of an ionic compound, molten or in aqueous solution, by the use of electricity. The other day we were studying about electrolysis of molten solution. Today we will focus our attention to the study of electrolysis of solutions. The product formed from electrolysis of solutions may be different from those obtained from electrolysis of molten substances. This is because water itself produces ions. H2O will give you H plus ions plus OH minus ions. The ions of water compete with the ions of other substances. Only one type of ion gets discharged at each electrodes. At the cathode, that is the negative electrode, the metal will be produced if it is less reactive than hydrogen. Number two, hydrogen will be produced if the metal is more reactive than hydrogen. Example, electrolysis of NaCl solution produces hydrogen at the cathode as sodium is more reactive than hydrogen. At the anode, positive electrode, if the negative ions like chloride or bromide are from simple compounds, then that element will be produced. Number two, if no halogen ions are present, then hydroxide ions will be formed. Number three, sulfate, nitrate, and carbonates are not discharged at anode if hydroxide is present. Now, we study about electrolysis of concentrated sodium chloride solution. Here is a simple diagram showing the movement and discharge of ions in the electrolysis of concentrated sodium chloride solution. There are four different ions present in the solution. The cations, sodium and hydrogen, go to the cathode. The anions, chloride and hydroxide, go to the anode. Now let us see the reactions taking place at the cathode and at the anode. So let's study first the reaction taking place at the cathode. So reaction at the cathode. Let's underline this. So as the sodium is more reactive, TiV is more reactive than the hydrogen, Hydroge, hydrogen, the H plus ions, that is the hydrogen ions, accepts electrons. So we can write down H plus plus electrons will give you H, that is hydrogen. Then the two hydrogen atoms will combine to form a hydrogen molecule. So we can write down the equation as H plus H will give you H2. And finally, we'll see hydrogen gas bubbles, bubbles, bubbles off at the cathode, cathode. And finally we can write down the final equation, 2H plus 2 electrons will give you hydrogen molecule. So this is the reactions that is taking place at the cathode during electrolysis of concentrated sodium chloride solution. You can see it in the diagram that sodium is not being attracted. Basically, it will be when we focus here, it will be the hydrogen that will be attracted. Why? Because the sodium is more reactive than the hydrogen. So hydrogen ions will accept electrons more. Let's see what happens at the anode. So we can write down at the electrode anode. We can underline it again. Yeah. Now, chlorine ions are discharged more readily than hydroxide ions. So we can write it down. Chlorine ions are discharged, discharged, discharged more readily, readily, readily than the hydroxide ions. So what will happen? Chlorine will form chlorine plus electrons. So what we see is two chlorine, CHLORINE, chlorine atoms combine, will combine to form a chlorine, CHLORINE, chlorine molecule. So we can show it in the equation. Cl plus Cl will give you Cl2. And what do we observe over here? If we look at this part, we'll observe, we can write it down, pale green gas, pale green gas is produced, PRODUCED, produced at the anode. So we can write the equation 2Cl minus, and then we can show Cl2 plus 2 electrons. So this is the equation. And finally, we see NaOH, the alkaline, ALKALINE, alkaline solution is left behind, left behind, is left behind. So overall, what we see is in the equation, in the reaction, electrolysis of concentrated sodium hydroxide solution, we see that at the anode, sorry, let's start from cathode. Hydrogen gas is produced at the cathode, and at the anode, we have chlorine gas. So, but NaOH, so that means sodium ions and hydroxide ions are left behind, and they combine and form sodium hydroxide solution. Therefore, the solution will become alkaline, and we can find it out by adding an indicator to the solution. So we have products, the hydrogen, chlorine, and sodium hydroxide. So this is how we obtain we obtain the products sodium hydroxide, and the two gases hydrogen and chlorine. So I hope you have understood it. Students, if you like it, please subscribe and please share.